Hi there, and welcome back to another episode at Station Road. Now, where we left off in the last episode, we sort of kind of almost got the interior complete, and there was still a few little bits and bobs to do, of course, pictures and further furniture and things like that. So that's what we're tackling today to a degree, but what I really did want to sort of map out and sort out was the internal lighting and where LEDs were going to go, and sorting out how to manage the wiring, where the power feeds were coming in, and so forth. So that's probably more what's going to be happening in today's episode. So yes, we get into the interior lighting for the main station building. Now, one of the interesting aspects about railway modelling and working on a certain project is that you generally sort of have set tasks that go in a set order, and you can't do that task until you've done this task and so forth. And this lighting is kind of a little bit like that, because as I've been completing the interior details, the next step there is the ceilings and working that out, which then also means that you have to start dealing with the roof line and how the roof structure is going to be supported with the slate on top and all of those aspects. So in doing that, part of the ceiling structure and the roof structure and things like that, of course, is making sure that I'm allocating spaces and various things like that for lighting. So where are the LEDs going to go? Where's the wiring going to go? And so forth. Now, to a certain degree, I'd actually planned that in terms of the power feed, where the power comes in, and that, of course, is through two of the chimney breasts, which works out really well. But from that point on, then you've got to sort of work out, well, where do we want to have some lighting that's going to make sure that all the separate rooms are covered. So in doing that, really, I kind of feel like this lighting aspect, which is in the second part of this video, is kind of Q-jumped a little bit to a certain degree. So in the first part of this video, I do carry on with a little bit of further interior detail. So that's things like pictures on the wall, route maps, some other elements that are sort of more wall orientated, I should say. I'm not worrying about carrying on with further furniture detail, because that can be added at a later stage. So that's things like bench seats in the waiting rooms, desks, cupboards, and other aspects that might go into the station master's office and the porter's office and so forth. So those things can wait, and of course also the toilets and all of that kind of thing. So the first half is some of this detail on the walls, and then we get into the ceiling and the lighting. So anyway, this is quite a lengthy video, so there will be chapters in there, so you can actually skip through if you would just want to get to the lighting side of things. So rather than actually make this video any longer than it already is, let's just get into what I got up to. So you've caught up with me now looking at the roof and ceiling structure. Now, this is a little bit of a skip forward, but I'd gone ahead and done a little bit of interior detail, or further interior detail, I should say, in terms of pictures on the wall, clocks, timetables, route maps, and all of those kind of things. And I'll show you some footage of that shortly, but what I'm actually doing here is just applying a ceiling finish. So this is the underside of the roof, or the ceiling surface, and I sort of thought it might be, if we're looking at it sort of Victorian style structure, and maybe more sort of utilitarian kind of railway station, as opposed to something that's ornate, that maybe it may have been sort of like a a tongue and groove type ceiling, and it's hard to say, unfortunately. Here in New Zealand, it would have been, most likely would have been a tongue and groove ceiling that was then painted in a sort of a white colour or something like that. That seemed to be quite a common ceiling substrate for New Zealand, and even community halls, churches, lots of places. And then for the more fancy, bigger budget buildings from the Victorian era, it could have been pressed steel or pressed iron. Pressed tin. Would have been pressed tin ceilings, and that was generally usually for maybe retail shops and things like that, or something a little bit more elaborate, and it would often have quite an elaborate design in the pressed tin. And of course, some of those ceilings are still around these days, or they've uncovered them in renovations and they're all rusted out and so forth, and paint's flaked off them. But I suspect here possibly it would have been a tongue and groove, so it's got a slight sort of slat finish to it. So I'm just applying these to the ceiling panels, and it's easier to do that now than before I actually start adding in the upper roof structure. So this has just been printed on label paper, and it's not a straight white. I've printed just a slightly off-white colour to sort of maybe represent a bit of grime, and peeling the wrong end there, and give it a little bit of a used look about it, I guess, or lived in look, should we say. So yeah, the remaining details that were added into the main structures, that's all done now. The only components that I haven't done yet is remaining furniture. So that's the bench seating and any other items, for example desks, tables, or anything like that may well have been, well, they certainly would have been in the station master's office and the porter's office, but I'm not sure whether there would have been any tables or desks in the waiting areas. There could have been, but all of those elements I've still got to do, and I'm going through a phase where I want to see if I can 3D print all of that stuff, because previously I'd done those bench seats and they were laser cut and assembled. What I'm sort of hoping to do maybe is the bench seats are 3D printed along with everything else, but it's a case of doing a bit of trial and error, a bit of testing, and that does take a bit of time. So I'm leaving that out because it's not critical that I get everything into this interior, because as we know, the roof components will be removable. Because interesting, as a lot of people said, and I think I've mentioned myself, is what on earth's the point in putting all this detail into the interiors if you can't see it, or if you can only see it through the puny little wee windows that exist around the outside. And of course you will be able to see it through those windows if you look closely, but the ceilings or the roofs are going to be removable, so that you can actually take the roof off and have a look inside from time to time. And it's also going to be beneficial when it comes to doing the lighting as well. So although I'm going to be using LEDs generally usually seem to last for an awful long time, but in the event that one pops or so forth, then it's easy enough for me to get in and replace an LED. So hence another good reason for removable roofs. So all of the images and so forth are essentially just printed on laser printer, had a clear coat of matte varnish over it, then I've just stuck them onto various bits of card, mostly the thin black card, and then trimmed out. So there's the sort of promotional posters, like British Railways posters from the 50s and 60s, being the era that my station or the station will be in. And then we've got some route maps, so they're so small that it doesn't really matter if you can't quite see what it is, but there's a route map of all the railways throughout Great Britain or the UK, and then there is a localised route maps, and there's train timetables and various other bits and pieces, and of course the quintessential Queen Elizabeth portraits as well to sit pride of place in some of the rooms. So they were all applied, but they just sort of took a bit of time, took a little bit of effort to really sort of work out where everything was going. And yeah, it's quite a time-consuming fiddly part doing all of those images, but I certainly think with all of that side of things added in now, it's certainly looking a lot more complete in that sense. Right, so we've now got our ceiling surfaces stuck on, and yeah, in this sort of tongue and groove style, I think will suit okay. Now we've got various slots on this side, so these components of course are all laser cut, and there's various holes that map up with locations for the rooms where LEDs will be, and then also some holes for where wiring is actually going to come through. So I need to reopen these holes up, but I'm not doing these slots because these slots essentially are for the likes of our rafters that are going in here. So it's only actually the holes that for the LEDs that I just need to trim back out again. So it's one of the things that often I come across when it comes to applying things and putting things together is getting stuff around the wrong way. So these two here, it doesn't matter, or at least that one doesn't matter because it's kind of symmetrical. It doesn't matter which side I'd actually applied the tongue and groove texture to. This one here, it didn't really matter too much, although fortunately in this situation I did actually apply this texture to the correct side. This one here though, because there's nothing really symmetrical going on here, I applied this texture to the wrong side. So I'm going to have to laser cut another one of these, print another one of those. So these things do happen, you know. I don't want people to think that somehow I am a faultless model maker because I'm certainly not, and I just don't worry about putting too much of that stuff in because everyone makes mistakes. If I wanted the channel to actually gain more subscribers and become more of a successful channel, then yeah, I would include every single stuff up and cock up that I actually make, because I know that that's what entertains people. But it's about model making. It's not about people doing boo-boos and having bloopers all the time. So yeah, rightio, off to the laser cutter and I'll cut another one of these. Right, so I've recut a ceiling section for the one that I've cocked up, and I'm just actually waiting for the matte clear coat to dry on the reprint for the tongue and groove texture. But we'll set that aside because what we can do is we can get on with these other panels, ceiling panels. So this is a single hole here, that's of course where the LED will shine through, and of course we've got our slots in here. Now what we've got here is just some very simple rafter type structures which will form the roof line. So I've kept it relatively simple because it doesn't need to, none of this is going to be seen. And so the idea is that there is this lengthways frame here, and then these two slot in at each end and slot in at that end, and that creates quite a rigid framework then for the roof to go on top. So I have seen these laser cut kits, and they actually go down the full Monty in terms of rafters and roof beams, and you know, it looks great until the roof is on, and then you can never see it again. So I just don't really understand why go to so much trouble to do rafters and all of that kind of thing, and if it's going to end up being hidden. So that's what we've got here. So we're just going to fix this together with some rocket card glue. Right, so that's the basic structure for supporting our roof, and of course I've left all of these gaps in here. I mean, I could have made this solid, but the idea of having these hollow through here is that at least I can feed wiring through. We're not going to get into issues with that. So that's that one. This is the central roof span, so this is actually what will be over the top of the main booking hall or waiting room. So, and then this is one of the ends, and this is different. It's a higher pitch on the roof than the middle section. So as you can see, what I'm doing, as I often do, is a test fit just to make sure that everything's okay, because I actually cut these components out, oh gosh, probably almost 2 months ago, thinking I want to get on to doing the roof, but then I realised that there's not much point in doing that until I've actually done all the interior. So these have been sitting around waiting patiently to be put together. So now this strut is running through the middle of that, but that's actually okay. I'm not too worried about it. That's not where an LED is going. That is where the wiring is going to come up through the chimney breast. So there's plenty of space there for wiring to get through, so I'm not too worried about that. So that's a good fit. So we'll pop this in. So these two components are different materials. So this component here, the rafter shape component, is 2mm MDF, which is just to give it a bit of rigidity, to give it that strength, whereas this piece here in the middle, which is really only there to, I guess in a way, just anchor these rafter components perpendicular to the ceiling so that they're nice and square, and that is just out of 1.25mm caseboard. And then of course the actual ceiling panel itself is caseboard as well, so it's the 1.25mm caseboard. Right, so that's two of those. I'll get onto this off camera, and I've got to do the tongue and groove ceiling panels on it first, and then we'll actually get into starting to plan out this wiring and the LEDs and all of that. Right, so I've finished assembling the roof structures. So we've got our tongue and groove type of ceiling on that side, the holes for the LEDs, and then that's for the wiring, and then we've just got the simple rafter structure for our roof line. So that's one there, that's the one for the other side, and then our central one. Now this one here I've begun adding a little bit of wiring, because we've got an unusual situation in that we've got our chimney breast here, which is going to have a feed coming up, electrical feed of wiring, and then there's a chimney breast here that's also going to have a feed of wiring. Now, I could have run everything through in one go, but what I actually need to do, or what I planned from the outset, was that each of these roof components can be lifted off individually, so that's not a roof that's all in one piece that can be lifted off, because it's more in terms of the assembly and design side of it rather than anything else. So for example, this roof component with its ceiling slots in here, and this one slots into here, and then of course this one slots into here. So the idea is that what's going to happen here is we've got our roof line running through here, so the central roof unit, this piece here, will lift off first, and this is when it comes to have a look on the inside of the building and admire all the interior detailing. This one would come off first, and the only light in this one is just in here, and there's no feed coming through in the central section, so I have to bring the feed through from this section. So what I've done is I've screwed in a little wee plug here. So this is just a little 2-pin JST, and I think these might be a DCC Concepts plug system from memory, and I was going to use it for something else. I wasn't sure what it was now. That was years ago. But anyway, what it does is it actually works out really well. So what I can do is plug in the cable into here, for example. This wire will feed through the hole in the wall here, and we'll just feed it through, for example, in here. So the idea is that when I lift the middle section first, because we can't take out the two side sections because the middle section is going to overlap, because we're going to have our valleys running down here. There's going to be roof valleys in here, so we have to lift this section out first. This is going to have a little bit of extra wire on it so that I can pull it out, and then what I can do is, once it's out and free, because this end will be open from here, you can imagine there'll be a roof over here, is that I can get in here and pull this plug out, and then this roof becomes free and I can take it away. Then once that's out, then of course I can then lift up this roof, pull this away, and bring that feed through the hole in the wall, and then that becomes free. So all the roofs can then completely come off, and what we'll end up with is some wiring that's coming up through here, which I'll probably use the same kind of plugs, just add a few more of these in, that I can unplug from here from the cables that are actually coming up through the chimney breast. So I hope that kind of makes sense. It's a little bit complex, but that is the method around the wiring side of things. So we'll just shift the building aside, and the LEDs that I'm using are quite small. They're nano or micro LEDs, and I think they're 2mm by 1.2mm, so they're very small. But the idea is, if we bring in one of these roof panels, and we'll just take that out of there for now, is it's my usual method, and I'll just quickly run through it, is sandwiching the LED between two bits of paper that are literally just glued together with a bit of PVA, or I might even just use some rocket card glue, and that then kind of protects the LED, because they're so fragile, the wires can easily snap off the back of these, and that also creates quite a decent area for the LED to be then attached to the inside of the ceiling here. And then so essentially all you end up with is the LED shining down through the hole in the ceiling, and once they're anchored in place, then I can be a little bit, don't have to be so delicate with these very fine wires when it comes to trimming them to the right length and clearing a bit of the insulation off it and connecting it up to what I'll probably use is just a little bit of Veraboard to hook up all the wires to. So I'm just trimming out some bits of standard A4 paper, printer paper, for our LED mounts, I guess you could call them, and we're just going to pop our LEDs down on the edge of this paper. We've got the LED there and it's facing up, and I'm basically just putting PVA glue all over the top of it, and then we're just going to get one of our little snips of paper that we've cut out, and then that's just stuck over the top, so the glue oozes out, but that doesn't really matter, and it kind of works out quite well because it kind of oozes up and around the LED, and I think it just gives it a little bit of extra strength. And we can just smear that glue around a little bit, and that's how I'll do these LEDs. Once I've stuck all of these onto the edge here with these paper tabs, then I can just simply trim out what I need. So our paper mounts have now dried with each of these LEDs sandwiched in between, and I've just trimmed off all the excess paper, and I'm now just going to trim these out. Now I've just got to be careful not to actually cut through any of the wires, and I might actually use a knife for doing this. Right, so if we take one of these LEDs, and I'll just demonstrate with one, and which one should we do? We'll do this one here, and the idea is that we're just going to slot this in here. Now I've cut a bit of extra white here, so this can be trimmed back depending on if these holes are close to the rafter structure that we've got here, so that just needs trimming just a little bit. What do we got? So if we turn that up the other way, it should slot into that hole nicely. And if I turn it over, we can see our LED there. So with that, it's just a case of popping a little bit of PVA glue, and we just need to drizzle just a little bit around the paper tab. Doesn't need to be too much, and slot this into place and squash it down, and that's essentially basically how I mount all my lighting into ceilings, because I don't certainly go to the lengths of pendant lighting or light fittings actually on the inside. I think, although that could be quite an interesting challenge to do that one day in this situation, in order to get that sort of the lighting effect within the building, this is quite a satisfactory method of doing it. So I'll carry on and attach all of these, and then come back, of course, when we're at a point to start trimming all these wires to the lengths that they need to be, and also incorporating the other components we need to actually build up these circuits. So I've now anchored all the remaining LEDs in place, and they're all firmly glued down, and I've given them an opportunity to dry as well, so it means that these LEDs are pretty secure now, and I feel reasonably confident that these wires are not going to get wrenched out of the LEDs as I sort of trim them and connect them up to create this circuit. So an important procedure also that I carry out when it comes to installing LEDs is testing the LEDs throughout the process. So I initially test all the LEDs before I use them, so straight out of the packet I'll test them, make sure they're all working. I have come across the odd dud LED before, so it does pay to actually test them all before you start installing them into the building or whatever it is that you're assembling. And then I actually continue to test the LEDs throughout the assembly process. So I just use a 9-volt battery, which we've got here, and then of course the corresponding plug or harness for the battery, and at the other end I've got a JST plug, so I can actually plug in other devices or so forth through there. But at the moment we've just got that plugged in with some exposed wires, and soldered in down here on the red wire is a resistor. So of course you need a resistor when you're running LEDs, or otherwise you're just going to end up popping your LEDs. So there's a resistor in the circuit in here, and essentially what I do throughout the process, and I have actually tested these, are all working, but just to demonstrate, we'll take this one for example, and if I locate a pair of wires here, let's go with these ones here, and it's just a simple case of attaching the red to the red and the blue to the blue, blue to the black in this situation, and we have our working LED. I don't know whether that's showing up, it's in the top corner up here. So I do that with all the LEDs, and as I've mentioned, I've already gone through and tested them all and they're all working. So I think it's quite important to do that throughout the process. So it's nothing worse than actually going ahead, putting it all together, assembling it and going, wow, that looks great, and then you find out that some of your LEDs, or all of them, aren't working depending on the way they're wired in. So 3 components here that need setting up with some wiring. Now I've got some additional components here, so we've got a few more of these plugs like the one that we've got set up here. So there's going to be one in each of these roof sections, and then we've got some VeriBoard here, or circuit board here, which is just basically the punched holes with the copper strip in it. That just helps with soldering all the wiring into groups and trying to keep the wiring as tidy as possible. So that's those boards there, so there'll be one in each of those. And then we've also got some of this wire which has the JST plugs at each end, so that's to plug into these sockets here, which, as I mentioned before, I think they're DCC Concepts product. So the idea behind that is that the wiring can actually remain within the chimney breast if I ever need to lift the ceilings or the roof components off, and it means it can just simply be unplugged and then the whole roof assembly can be removed. So we've got a couple of those wires, and then not forgetting we've also got to wire in some resistors as well. But what we'll do is we'll start with the easiest roof first. That's what I generally always do, is always sort of start where it's easy. So we're just going to set those 2 roofs aside, because at the end of the day, this middle roof here, which is above the main booking hall, it's a simple case of attaching these wires to the LED wires. And in this scenario, I don't really need a circuit board or anything like that to solder into, and we don't need any of the plugs. We've got the plug here to connect through into the other area. So in this situation, I'm just going to twist the wires together and then pop a bit of heat shrink over it, and that should be enough to keep the electrical continuity going with that. So I've completed the wiring for this, and unfortunately I thought I was videoing it, but the SD card was full, so no footage was taken. But just to explain it, I twisted the wires together and then just drizzled a bit of solder and then popped some heat shrink over it, and that's pretty much it set up. Now I haven't included a resistor in this circuit because the resistor will be in the circuit in the roof next door, so that's complete. So we'll set that aside and we'll take a look at the roof next door and sort out the wiring for this. So the plan is, and I know that there's sort of several methods of setting up wiring for LEDs, and it seems that setting up wiring in series for LEDs is preferred, but that's based on a consistent power source, and we just don't know how consistent that will be. It apparently is not really recommended to run LEDs in parallel because of something to do with the variation in power or so forth, but I've set up plenty of LEDs in parallel before and they seem to work okay. It does change the brightness, obviously, because it's drawing more current, and through the resistor it dulls it down, but that's actually a good thing because the LEDs are very bright and it reduces the brightness a bit and makes it look a little bit more realistic. So I'm going to be running a single resistor in each of these circuits. So it's just a case of working out, mapping out the location of these various elements. We've got this JST socket here, we've got a bit of circuit board here, and then we've got a resistor to install, plus also we've got a cable that's coming up from the chimney breast as well. So I think what I'll do is we're just going to plug one of these cables in at one end, and I think probably popping this plug here somewhere will be suitable for that to run down through the chimney. Then we're going to have actually I might put it sideways because otherwise it's going to be difficult getting the plug in and out, so it may need to go that way, and then we're going to have the plug coming out of this end, then that's going to go into this board, and then from there we're going to have this plug cable coming out, that's going to go next door into the roof that we've just sorted out, and then all of these LEDs are going to be secured into here as well. So you'll have to excuse my rather rough soldering techniques. It looks a little bit bodgy when you're looking at it as close up as this, but you can see the two wires coming in. We've got the black into one of the outer strips and the red wires coming into the middle strip, and from that middle strip the resistor is then connected over to the other outer strip, so we end up with this crossing over there. So essentially what that means then is that the LEDs are connected to the strips on either side, and that enables the resistor to be part of the circuit. So if I position these two roofs roughly where they will be in relation to each other, and we're going to have our circuit board in here, and I think if I just position it over here, and actually I'll plug this in, and it may well sort of loop around like so. So we may have that there and that on the other side, and then of course we're going to have our cable running down. And what we've got to do in here is there's going to be this cable running through, but I want to give it a little bit of extra lead on it, a little bit of extra cable on it, so that we can pull it out when it comes to detaching these roofs. So it needs a little bit of extra, and it doesn't matter if we just have a bit of loose wiring packed into this roof cavity here. So I don't know whether this is probably a little bit too much for it, but I'm thinking if I maybe trim it back to about there, that would give us enough to lift it out. So we'll trim this back to here, and then we can attach some wires into here. So I think what I'll do is I'll go ahead, because it's a little bit difficult, it's probably not a lot you can see with the camera, so I think what I'll do is solder these into place, get all this wiring ready, and get that all soldered onto the tabs either side, and then come back when it's done and you can see how it's all come together. Right, so I've now completed all the wiring that's up in the roof cavities, and I think now we're at the point where I actually need to join these three building components together, and they've been apart from the beginning for quite a while, but I feel safe enough now that we can actually bring this all together in terms of the main building structure as one piece. So taking a closer look at the wiring, hopefully you can sort of make sense of what's going on in here. We've got our power feed coming up through the larger hole where the chimney breast is. It's going into one of those DCC Concepts JST plugs. That comes out of that, goes into this circuit board where this incorporates a resistor, and then from there we've got feeds going out to the different LEDs. So that's the simplicity of it, but it kind of looks a little bit like a jumble. So the JST plugs here have been positioned in such a way as I still have access to these to unplug them. So as you can imagine, we've got our roof line coming across here. This part of roof here on these two end buildings will actually be slightly open here at this end, which will give access to this, and hopefully it will make better sense when we get to that point in terms of the actual roof on the top of here. So what we'll do is we'll just take out these roof sections as they currently are. This won't be the exact process, but the idea is that this cable will be unplugged from here, and then this cable in here which comes up through the chimney breast, that will be unplugged, and then the idea is that we can just simply lift these out. That cable will come through here, and that one will come out, and that simply removes that roof section. And similar process here, this plug here will be disconnected, and I actually think probably the tweezers are going to be the best bet for undoing these plugs. And of course I will have access to do that even after this roof is on, with the upper gabled roof section, and then once again it's just a case of lifting that out, and then you're left with these cables here. So as I mentioned, what we can do is join all these three components together, and I thought it would be best if we do that now before we have all these wires running out the bottom, in which case we can actually keep this whole entire unit flat. So this building has been masquerading as 3 separate buildings since the beginning, but I think now we can actually anchor these together. So what I'm going to use, I think, for doing this is just simply some of the rocket card glue, and then I may need to clamp it a little bit, but we'll see how it goes. Right, so I've now glued the 3 main building components together, and what I've done is added a base unit as well. So this is to factor in when it sits on the platform. So the platform top will be the 1.25mm card. So what I've done is glued a base section of the same thickness onto the underside of the entire structure, and in doing so what I've been able to do there is laser cut in some grooves which allows the wiring to be fed through to a single location where those wires will then drop through the platform. So at the moment they're just poking out the front here, and of course I've used that to set up a temporary power supply, a 9-volt battery, so that I can actually test the lighting to make sure it's all working. So the lighting's looking pretty good, and it's a reasonably good brightness. It's not too bright, but it's enough to be able to see in there, and I think it's certainly come together quite well. It's a bit tricky trying to capture the interior, of course, with the focus on the camera, so it seems to dart in and out of trying to focus on the interior and the window frames itself, but hopefully get a reasonably good idea of being able to see inside the interior and see some of the interior detail through the windows. So I think we can safely tick off the internal lighting and of course all the corresponding wiring. Now there's a bit of an elephant in the room, and that of course is, what about the external lighting? Now interestingly, there seems to be only one external light or light bracket, wall mounted light bracket on the old station, and there would have been 2. There would have been one on the other side of the street side. I'm really not quite sure what would have been on the other side, because not forgetting that we have the canopy. Now there is really nothing out there that even remotely resembles this type of quite ornate wall mounted light fitting, and I'm yet to decide really whether I'll probably ever find something, or whether I fashion something, or whether it's just simply a 3D printed component but is not illuminated, because I think it may be quite tricky. I will have a go at it and have further, well, at least investigate it a bit further and see if there's something that I can put together. But with the ornateness to the lighting bracket and the very unusual square shaped cover over the light as well, that there's nothing like it. I couldn't find anything that's at least off the shelf. So I'm just pausing that aspect to it. Now, if I do go down the route of being able to illuminate some external wall lights, it's not going to be too much of an issue for me to mount that and bring a feed up through into the ceiling cavity, into the roof cavity, and wire it into those circuit boards that I've got there so they can be added in. So in terms of the next episode, what we'll be getting onto, of course, is the actual roof line itself. So that is the slate, plus also extending the chimney breasts and actually the chimneys coming up through the roof line as well. So when we get to that point, we're really starting to finalize the outer shape of this station. And interestingly, of course, at the moment we've got Laurengill, they're actually dismantling their roof and all the tiles are coming off, and I'm going to be at a phase where we're going to be putting the roof on. So yeah, it's quite interesting that we're sort of at a very similar phase in our builds. So I'll leave it there for today's episode. I certainly hope you've gained some inspiration and insights into, well, internal lighting in buildings and managing wiring and things like that, or at least the method that I use for doing that, and hopefully you might have found that useful. So do take care, everyone. Look after yourselves. Of course, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will catch you next time. Bye for now.